Oh, it's still going.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Psych with Dr. DK. I am so excited to be here with you today. I'm going to be sharing my story as a guardian of siblings and what that looks like from a perspective of like foster care. I have been asked quite a lot what I have done for the foster care system. So it's kind of funny to get that question, and I'm like, wow, okay, like even when I'm explaining my story, like I'm a guardian of 5 kids, or have been a guardian of 5 kids, and they were my siblings. And always at the end of sharing my story, someone has asked, what are you doing to help the foster care system? So I wanted to kind of talk about this because I think it's really interesting to get this question so much, and it's really interesting to share my story and still get that question. And I think there's a misconception of what guardianship is. So you have foster care. Foster care is when they're put into a stranger's home who is a foster care parent. That foster care parent is, taking over the guardianship of a child, and they are basically the stand-in parent until the parent either, one, the kid is reunified with the parent, or two, the kid stays with them until they no longer are with them. So there's that. Then there is something called kinship and guardianship. So depending on where you are, depending on the county, depending on the state, you can hear both terms. So guardianship in my state is usually a parent or an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent, or a sibling, or someone who is a friend of that child, or a friend of the family, who comes in and they take guardianship of this child. Sometimes the guardianship also applies to a adult who might have a disability, or maybe even a guardian of a elder. So it kind of depends on what it is for, but it is what it is. So with my guardianship, it's basically the same thing as foster care. The difference is I'm not considered a foster care parent. And I'm not licensed under as a foster care parent. I am a guardian. Typically what that also means is there's not as many visits sometimes. And really you work with the parent on trying to work those things out. So I became the guardian of my siblings in 2015. It was kind of an overnight thing that happened. Literally, some things were going on. We knew about it as the older siblings, and I got a call saying, hey, you need to come pick them up from a church. And it was just a lot, and it literally was an overnight situation that happened. But before that, I already had 2 of my siblings who were in my house. So we lived in a 500 square foot, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom apartment. I had just moved in, and I got a call from a second brother who was like, I need a place to stay. And so I picked him up, and we just were kind of living there. And a few months later, I got a call to pick up the younger 3. At that point, they were 15, 14, and 12. And it was just a whirlwind. I was in court 2 to 3 times a week trying to get the paperwork done. And I mean, it was a stack of paperwork. Each kid was like 100 to 120 pages. Had to get them enrolled in school because they were homeschooled before that. Had to get their immunizations and all of these things. And it just felt chaos all of the time. I was overwhelmed. And I think really what happens is you're stepping into someone's story at a very interesting time of a teenage year. And you're told just kind of like, they'll be fine. They won't be hurt or anything like that. And what you don't realize in your own story when you're a guardian is that there are things that are brought up for you as well. And there's some trauma that happens. And I don't use that word lightly. I know there are so many people out there that kind of mock what trauma truly is. And they'll be like, oh, I have trauma. And it's like, they slammed on their brakes. Now I have trauma now. And it's like, that's okay. So what trauma really is, and what it is what it usually means. Trauma is going through a situation that's hard, and it leaves an emotional burden to you and an emotional reaction. Typically it is emotional, where it lasts longer. You might have been physically assaulted or abused growing up, but that emotional trauma is lasting. So some people who have experienced physical abuse will have emotional trauma. If someone raises their hand quickly, they like jolts back. And so when you're dealing with guardianship, it's the same thing as foster care. There really isn't a difference outside of funding, and the title of what it's called. So when you take someone in, you do still have to deal with the emotional side of their trauma. And some of that is abandonment. And I think the hardest part is stepping into this role. There are most of these children or teenagers are not used to having a parent figure in their life or someone helping them with stuff. So they don't have someone saying, hey, did you do your homework? Hey, why did you ditch class? Hey, you need to wash your clothes. Hey, you need to do this, and this. You need to clean your room. And so there's this overwhelming burden on their side of just feeling like they're being micromanaged. They won't be able to say like, you're micromanaging me. But what they'll say is, you're not my parent, get off my back. And guardianship is really hard because not a lot of people recognize it. And I think for myself, me being the sibling of my 5 siblings and their guardian, I would hear a lot like, so like you're just babysitting them. So with guardianship though, you're not just taking them in your house, you're taking them on financially, emotionally, physically. Like it's all of the things that you're doing for them, and they are your child. But the difference is the funding is not as big. So if you have a foster care kid, you might get like $1,000 a month. You might get $2,500 a month. But with guardianship, for my situation at least, it was based off my income. And basically I got state assistance based off of how much I made and my family size. And I remember, it really sucks. I was sitting in the office and I was told by the court and a caseworker, like, oh, you're going to get like $2,500 per kid because they're teenagers. At 18, you can petition to have them stay in to 21. And they were talking about the foster care side. So she's like, the caseworker's like, you need to go get guardianship of them, and you need to act quickly so that you can get this funding, right? And so I was like, oh, perfect. Like, this will really help. And like, I didn't take them in for money at all. That was not why I took them in. I took them in because I didn't want them to go to a foster home and be split up, because there was 3 under the age of 18 and they're teenagers. Chances are them all 3 being put into the same home was not going to happen. And what tends to happen is there's a cutoff from the family. And if you're not the parents, you have no say in what happens with them. Like if you're a sibling, they just are kind of like, okay, you're who are you as a foster parent? Or else you have 30 people at your door. So I understood. So I was working through with this caseworker, and the caseworker's like, hey, go get guardianship of them. And I'm like, okay. So I did. And it took a couple of months to do that. And the judge approved it. And so when I finally took these documentations into the county's like, oh no, you don't qualify for the foster care funding. You qualify for what's called guardianship funding. It's based off your income. So, and they told me, they're like, if you make more money, you get less help. And I'm like, but these are not my kids. And the guy looked at me, he goes, you have the same last name. How are they not your kids? And I was like, I'm 24 and they're literally 12, 14, 15, 19, and 18. I would have been like 5, 6. I can't do math, but I just can't. But I was like 5 or 6 years old to 14 having children, and they're all mine. And he's like, well, I can't prove otherwise. I was like, I can do a DNA test. I have their birth certificates, and their mother's maiden name is this, and their father's name is this. Like, that's not my name. And my birth certificate shows that they are also my parents. And so there was just and I kind of just said it like that, like, they're not my kids. Like, look at our birth certificates. We all have the same parents. And the guy flagged my case and was like hostile, fraud. And so all the money got frozen. So as a guardian, you don't have people telling you what to say and not to say. But also at the same time too, like, they will sometimes find ways to cut off what you're making. If they feel like you're not spending your money right, they can flag you. And that's basically what happened. And I talked to a few other people, and they were like, basically we just stopped doing the Guardian funding because they were wanting access to our bank accounts. They were wanting access to what we were spending our money on. They wanted, one person I was talking to said, they wanted an expense report from my bank, and like, it had to be signed by my bank. And so they just stopped trying to use this funding from the county. And there wasn't a lot of resources at that point for guardianship in my county. Since then, it's grown. But in this chaos of already taking in 5 people and being in a 1-bedroom apartment, trying to get something bigger and change jobs to go from working in a restaurant to finding a 9-to-5 to try to accommodate the kids' schedule and things like that, I just felt like I was being hit down over and over and over again. And I don't know if you have been a guardian before, if you felt that way too, but I just felt like there was a lack of support from a lot of different people. Luckily, I had my church community at that point who stepped in and stepped up. But there were still people in my church community who were like, you're screwing them over, you're screwing them up. Like, I'm not joking. This is what people told me. You're crazy for doing this. Like, this does not help them. You should let them go to a foster home. And that baffled me because, people, it's funny because a lot of people will say things like family is forever and you do whatever it takes for your family. And then when you do something like this, there's people who have opinions. And so something I learned as a guardian and a parent and a sister and a person is that not everybody understands the situation, first and foremost. But secondly, not everybody is going to give you wise wisdom or helpful tips. They're just gonna kind of raffle things off in their head and be like, la, 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 and then they leave. Like, it doesn't keep them up at night. Their advice only really keeps you up at night. So when I was dealing with this, it kind of just sucked. It sucked because what I was looking for was compassion. I wasn't looking for answers. I wasn't looking for handouts. And let me explain what I mean. I wasn't looking for someone to come to me and say, hey, this is a good idea. I knew it was going to be hard. I knew it was going to suck. I wasn't looking for people to hand things to me. And that's why I was taking them in, was so people would give me money. I was simply looking at doing the right thing based off of what I felt God calling me to do, but also what my siblings needed. But being a guardian, people will look at you and, like, literally, I remember just like up to the little things too. A friend of mine was like, hey, your mom, it was Mother's Day. And he's like, hey, your mom, you need to stand up. And I was like, no. And then another person next to him was like, she's not a mom. And he's like, she's a mother. Like, she has guardianship of 5 of her siblings. She is more of a mom than I know anybody else to be. Like, and she's like, yeah, it's not the same thing. And like, this lady was offended because this man was telling me to stand up to be honored as a mother. And she said in this conversation, very brief conversation, well, she didn't birth them. And the guy just got up and walked away because he was so upset, and later told me, like, how could people say stuff like that? And I was like, you have no idea. Like, you have no idea what people believe that they can just tell you. And I've noticed this in a lot of the conversations that I've had with foster youth and parents and foster parents, is there is always 1 or 2 people in the audience who just like roll their eyes. And I have heard questions being asked, and I answer them to the best of my knowledge. But they are like skeptical, I think, of my story. But also too, they just don't understand it. Like, they really do think guardianship is different than foster care. And you as a sibling of these kids, they're like, you should have just done it and shut up. Like, it's not the same thing. And in these conversations, I have had people say to me, you're just babysitting. Like, why are you thinking you're a parent? And I'm like, I wasn't just babysitting. I was raising them. And they're like, no, that's different. Like, I have to do this, and this for school. I have to make sure they do their homework. And this is what they're telling me they're doing. I have to make sure they're fed, take them to the doctor's appointments. And I was like, that is everything I've done. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, just because I'm the sibling does not mean I'm not raising these children. And I think there is a misconception, and I said this earlier, but I think there's a misconception between what guardianship really is. And I think that people sometimes believe the person standing in front of them, giving them this understanding of like, this is what I went through, this is what I've dealt with. There's a few people, not everybody, just a few people who are just like, you're just pretending to be a savior, to have your voice heard, or they're offended because someone who's younger than them is doing this thing for them. And I don't know what it stems from. I don't know why, but I think there's just kind of just this like, oh, this person is wanting it to be the same thing and it's not, and maybe they're just having a bad day, or maybe they're just, again, not understanding what guardianship is. Like, I really don't know, but it's interesting to me when I get these calls or these questions in these Zoom calls or face-to-face environments where someone's just like, and why do I care? Why is this such a big deal? But my microphone's falling, so I'm trying to fix it because it's like I'm starting to get shorter and shorter. But it's a reality that not a lot of people really truly understand the whole purpose of just stepping in. When it doesn't matter what type of step in it is. It could be a step parent. It could be a foster parent. It could be a guardian. Like, just because it's not the full title does not mean it doesn't mean that you're less of a parent because you don't have that full title. So I'm just like wanting to capture it. It's like, I feel like step parents, they're still fighting for people in their community sometimes to be like, yeah, you're their dad or their mom. Yeah, you might be like this step. You're not their biological mom or dad. I've heard a lot of adoptive parents face this too, or adoptive children who, when people find out they're adopted, they're like, oh, so where's your real parents? And it's like, the person raising you is just as much of a parent as a parent who's biological that takes care of their kids. They're the same, but for some reason, I think with guardianship, especially when it is sibling raising sibling, there is just this kind of like, so what attitude toward people that it's just like, I guess it's not a big deal when it's a sibling doing it. And I'm not the first and only person to think this. I have a friend who's also a guardian of a friend's daughter. And she has also expressed that, like, sometimes when you're like, yeah, that's my kid, and they're just like, oh, like, where's their dad? And it's like, it's a long story, like, those are my kids. Like, and they find out and they're just like, oh, so you're not their real parent. And it's like, doggone it, like, I do everything a parent does for these children. And for some reason, people just like discount it because, I'm not labeled something else. And first, I want to encourage you, like, it's so frustrating as a conversation. I'm so sorry that you've had to experience that, but you are just as much as a parent as anybody else who is a parent. It's just different. It's a different title. It's a different way of having your children. But it is hard to be a guardian of somebody's kids because oftentimes you're not accepted into communities. And if you say, like, I remember there were a couple of mom groups that I was trying to join. because I really just didn't know what I was doing, and I wanted to raise teenagers the correct way, and I felt lost, and I felt confused, and I was hurting, and I said something, and I was just like, yeah, like I was thinking of going to the mom's group, and one of the moms looked at me and she's like, but you're not a mom. And I'm like, and someone else overheard this and was like, excuse me, like she's raising her 5 siblings, and she's like, babysitting is different than a parent. And like, she just was like, okay. And like, this person handled the conversation. It was like, you don't understand. Like, don't say that to somebody. And again, arrogance is really hard, but also just being like, well, you didn't birth them, basically, is what it always comes down to. And it is so heartbreaking. And like, I have been so bitter. So it's so many moments as a guardian and as a parent that like, it has been hard sometimes. It's been really hard because you have these people who are just like, you're not a real parent. And you're just kind of like, okay, so then when am I going to be a real parent? When are you going to look at me that I am a real parent? We are struggling with the same exact stuff. And I'm being able to give you advice on this too, or seeking your advice on this situation. And you look at me and have the audacity to say, you're not a real parent. And I have been heartbroken over that so many times. And it's kind of like, it's to the equivalent of a really messed up way of saying like, you can't sit with us, like no matter what, you're not qualified. And it's like, ugh, like you just get so upset. And I know I'm rambling and I'm sorry, but it is true that there's just this misconception of what guardianship really is. And so again, like if we just want to define guardianship is where you're taking in these children to be their stand-in parent, to clothe them, to get them food, to get them to where they need to go, to get them educated. You take on those same burdens financially, emotionally, and physically. And it is the hardest thing to do that alone. And so it's like, even when you receive these kind of backlash comments from people, like I want you to be encouraged to like find other people who are going to encourage you. Don't stop right there and be like, oh, well, nobody understands my situation. And it's been really neat because over the years, because I didn't stop at that person, I have found some really amazing guardians of other children and foster parents who are just like, you are just as much as a foster parent or a guardian or a parent as I am. And I've had kids, I've fostered children, I've guardianed children, like whatever it is, whatever the title is. I've done that too. And wow, like you're on the other side. And what feels really weird, and I think this kind of might be something as well, is that a lot of the times the parents of teenagers are a little bit older. They're 40s and 50s, in their 40s and 50s. I'm 32. And when I was going through this, I was 24. So it's like, I'm on the other side now. All of the children are raised. And at 32, I'm like, yeah, raising teenagers is really hard. Here's some advice. And that could probably come across as like, it just doesn't come off fun or exciting or I don't know, worthy of wisdom. Because I'm only 32. And so this is where I want to encourage you, is that in age, doesn't matter what your age is. Like your experience in life is what matters. And I had a friend who used to say, it's not about the age, it's about the miles that I've had to deal with. And some of us will have had to deal with a lot of different things, a lot of different miles. I'm fixing the camera. Sorry, you guys. It's just falling. All my stuff is not great today. I'm in a new area. Anyways, but his point was, it's not about your age. It's not the number on your age. It is actually about what you've had to deal with in life and overcome. And he was just saying, like, he was encouraging me, and he's like, you have had to endure a lot, that sometimes your story, it's hard to believe that you've had to go through so much. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And he's like, but do you have to understand, like, just because of that, it doesn't mean that your story is less than, or that you shouldn't share your struggles. Because I started to hide like what I was going through because I was so tired of the ridicule from people. And I'm not joking. Like, I don't know what it is. And I've kind of I've kind of shared stuff where I'm just really frustrated, and I'm like, I don't know why people decide to tell me really nasty things of like, they're just really mean to me sometimes. Like, people are just like, they have no filter sometimes. And he told me, he's like, some people feel comfortable around you because you're very open, and so they feel like they can just say things without thinking. And I'm like, that's not an excuse. He's like, no, it's not. But he's like, you do have that warmth about you that like people won't filter what they say. So you have to filter what you carry. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Like, that's so crazy. Because that's true. Like, I do have to filter what I put on my heart from other people, right? So when you're a guardian, doesn't matter what your age is, doesn't matter how many kids you have, it doesn't matter if you're fostering, guardian, or a parent, there are going to be times in your life that people give you advice. And you, even single, no kids, you're going to get advice from people sometimes. And that advice, they might not filter it. They might not be very nice or kind about what they're sharing. So you, as a person, have to filter what you take on and what you apply in your life. And not everything everybody says is the greatest wisdom in the world. It doesn't always apply to you. It doesn't always sit well. It doesn't always work. But you have to get to a point in your thought process of saying, is this worthy of my energy and my time? Is this not a good thing to apply? Does it work for my situation? For example, one of the things was like, well, go ask their mom for money. Go ask their dad for money. That's not possible. And people just didn't understand that. They're like, you should be fighting for child support. And I'm like, they don't have anything. Like it just didn't apply. And honestly, being in court all the time is exhausting. And so it's like, I would have rather put my time elsewhere. So as I've grown and learned as a parent, the other thing that I've learned is every child is different. Every child is so different. You can't discipline them the same way. As they get older, certain things just don't work as discipline anymore. And it's hard. It is really, really, really hard to discipline people you're related to sometimes. And so it's just taking it and finding things that work. You will make mistakes. You will not be perfect. They will not always take what you have to say. But you got to keep trying, and you got to keep showing up and just doing the right thing every single day. I think as a parent, something that I've learned is there are certain things you just got to let go of. I know a lot of people push heavy on grades in school, and there was a point that I just gave up on pushing on grades and just being like, what are you learning today? What are you taking away from today? How will you apply this in the future? Sometimes it's attitude, where it's just like, you know what? Your grades are fine, but your attitude sucks. Like, we got to work on that a lot. And sometimes it's just showing up in the messy, as like, even when that kid cusses you out and flips their bed and destroys their room, like, you're still going to show up and say, hey, like, you still have a place here, but there are rules. And these are the rules. And this is why they're set. Like, you have to walk them through, because when someone's life is turned upside down, there is moments and times where it's like seasons of their year that they start to remember the chaos that they were in, and their trauma hits themselves a little bit differently. And that is the hardest thing to deal with as a guardian, is also realizing that not only do you have hurt and questions, but so do they. And they may not be in a place to willingly want to share about it. But yeah, being a guardian, it's also great. It could be really fun. But it is really hard. It's very hard. And no matter what people tell you, like, again, people will say really stupid things, really rude things. You got to apply that filter where you need to apply it and kind of move on from it, or because you're going to get stuck and you're going to feel like a failure all the time. And one of the other things that I learned was, You don't have to go from 0 to 100 as a guardian or a foster parent. I think sometimes that is, we're trying to like, well, we got to catch the kid up and we got to get them caught up in school and get their grades great and get them in sports and be like all the other parents out there. And it's like, maybe for this child or this teenager, the best thing to do is to pause and just ask them, like, what do you want? And they might be like, I want football, I want this, I want that, but then they don't make any strides to get there, and that's okay. Being like, hey, you're gonna just solely focus on getting through school today, because you adding anything else to your plate is gonna overwhelm you. Or like, hey, go ahead and try to put this on your plate and let's see what happens. Excuse me, I'm yawning. Sorry guys. It's been a rough day. It's really not a rough day. It's just didn't sleep well, but pregnancy, right? What can you do about it? But as a guardian, I think the biggest thing I learned was that you don't have to catch up to other kids. You don't have to get your kids caught up to other kids, and you don't have to be a parent who does everything all the time. You can slow down and you can say no. You can also ask your kids, what do they need and want? Because 9 times out of 10, you might be thinking of something and they're thinking of something totally different. And it's like any other kid. But the difference is there might not be that foundation of like, you know them to a T, and or they're also dealing with the trauma side. They're not just going to and from school. They might feel like their life is going to be turned upside down at any moment. So it's really important to bring them on board and let them start making decisions as an adult. And you can start doing this at 12, where little by little, they're learning things like, okay, you're going to do your laundry. Okay, you're going to set your alarms. Yeah, we'll get you to school. But like, you're in charge of turning your homework in. When they get to high school, it's like, hey, you're in charge of talking to your teachers about raising your grades. I'm going to have a conversation with you about it and this and this and that. But like, I'm not going to sit here and ask you every single day, did you do your homework? Did you do your homework? Did you turn it in? But what I'm going to say is, hey, it's, week 4 or 5 of the school year and you're doing really, really well. What are some things that are working that you can continue for the next, 10 to 15 weeks of this semester? Okay, now their grades aren't doing so good. Have you turned in your homework? What has that conversation looked like with your teacher? Well, I haven't talked to them. Why don't you talk to them instead of talking on their behalf? So it's things like that, just giving them more control over their life and realizing that even though you haven't had them for their entire life, you still can make a difference in the time that you have them. And I've learned more than that, but I think that's the biggest thing is, one is they have trauma that they're dealing with. 2, people will say things and you have to filter out what that is if you want to apply it or not. And 3, you're teaching these kids, it doesn't matter how long you've had them for, but you're teaching these kids to be young adults. And so it's really important to try to give them some control back in their life because they've never had that control before. And it's things that they can control. You're not telling them, hey, go get a job so you can pay your bills, but you're showing them like, hey, this is how you can talk to a parent or a teacher about raising your grades and showing them what that looks like, showing them how to communicate. So yeah, that's a little bit of my story. I hope all of this made sense. I know I rambled a little bit, but being a guardian has been interesting. It's been fun. It's been hard. It's been good. And it's been super ugly. And a lot of it wasn't even because of the kids. It was just the court, the parents, all of the things that life throws at you anyway. And it really is like being a single parent sometimes. Because at that point, the majority of having the kids, I was single, wasn't married yet. But it's interesting. It's just a lot. It's a lot to see through and to go through. But if you have any questions on guardianship, let me know. We can talk through that. And next week we'll be having a conversation on workplace trauma. No, not trauma. Workplace violence. Toxic work environments. That's what it's called. Anyways, we'll see you guys next week. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you guys later.